Today's COVID update is brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price but stay for the service.
We are back and we're moving into our first conversation for this morning, and we're joined by representatives of the Statistical Institute of Belize. And of course, they keep on collecting the data and we look forward to sharing it and understanding it a bit more with the staff there. We have with us this morning Tanisha Chavarria, who is the manager of Census Surveys and Administrative Statistics. Wendy Benavides, who is a statistician too in the same department, and Dept Ochayete, who is a statistician 1 in the economic statistics department. All right. So good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning,
everybody.
Good morning.
All right. We appreciate the opportunity to be able to understand a bit more about some of the latest numbers that you have released. And there's quite a bit. So we're going to try to dissect the ones that we can this morning. So I want to start off by finding out more about the Business Establishments Survey. Just a bit of your sample that was collected and some of the findings that you were able to collect.
Okay, good morning, Ms. Marlene and John. Yes, so I will be speaking about the business survey that we did in November, which was the impact of COVID-19 on business establishments.
Yeah.
So in November, we executed this survey and we sampled approximately 2,500 establishments across the country and across the industries. This sample was generated from our statistical business register, which is basically a listing of formal establishments who are registered with the Social Security Board or with the Belize Tax Services.
Yes.
Thus, in the sample itself, we were excluding, because our universe excludes informal sector.
Yeah.
Right. The survey was done using computer-assisted web interviews, which is the first for SIV that we do.
Oh.
And also we were assisted by using some computer-assisted telephone interviewing. Utilizing both approaches, that gave us a response rate of approximately 50% of the respondents. Yeah.
Okay. So let me just backdrop a bit. This is a very unique survey. So we have talked a lot about the impact of COVID on the business sector. But what this does is quantify and give us some numbers based on a sample of businesses as to what the impacts were and how businesses responded. What prompted this particular survey? It was just curiosity? Were you asked to create this information?
Well, basically, the Statistical Institute of Belize wanted to provide some information that could be quantified to what is available for all the business establishments in the business register, more or less to have a perception of the actual population. Yes, there have been studies that were done, but it's limited, I guess. It's not targeting an entire population. And this is actual a sample survey, so the inference goes back to the population.
Okay. So let's talk about some of the things that you were able to determine through the survey.
Okay, so one of the key questions that we asked was the employment composition, right? We compared what was the employment composition as of November 2020 versus the employment composition of March 2020, when the COVID-19 restriction just had just initiated. When we looked at that, the comparison between the full-time and part-time staffing, in March, we identified that approximately 78% of the establishments only hired full-time workers, and the remaining hired both full-time and part-time workers. What happened in November? Well, we had a shift in the composition of the staff, where most of the establishments reported that about 88% reported that they only hired full-time workers, and the remaining hired only both full-time and part-time. So as you see, there was a shift, and what we conclude is that obviously due to the pandemic, most of the establishments had to do a restructuring of their staff, and the ones that suffered mostly were the part-time workers.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that was one of the key findings that we found.
Yeah.
Also, something significant was to compare the level of change in the employment level.
Yes.
Right. When we did that analysis and compared what was the employment count reported to us by the establishments between November and March, there was a significant drop, about 35% throughout the country.
Yeah.
The districts that reported the highest drop in employment was Orange Rock with about 66%.
I found that interesting, Hefte. If we could just jump in there, 66% is the change in total number of employees by district from March 2020, pre-pandemic or start of the pandemic, to November 2020. Do we know whether that has to do with change of seasons for the crops, or were there high numbers of layoffs taking place in Orange Walk?
Yeah. Well, that was what was reported to us by the establishments that did respond, right? Okay. As we mentioned initially, it's about 50% of response rate that we had. So maybe some of the establishments that should have been answering did not respond for Orange Walk, so that's why the numbers are.
And that was followed actually by Cayo with 48.4%. Tell us about that. Give us an overview.
Okay, so similarly, in the Cayo district, they reported a decrease of employment level about 48%. Yeah. And what we found interesting was that in Belize district and Sand Creek, which are heavily tourist destinations, they only dropped by about 27%. But also, that's where the service sector is also concentrated. So that's what we expected.
So that's one of the things that I noted. You also have in just the overview that from the businesses that you surveyed, 11% closed temporarily their business, and 2% have remained permanently closed.
That's correct. As of November 2020.
As of November.
As of November 2020, 86% of the respondents in the population indicated that they are continuing their normal operations, and only 11% indicated that they had closed temporarily. That's correct. And only 2% indicated the total shut-off.
And diving deeper into that 2%, Corozal saw the largest number of permanent closures up until November.
That's correct.
Yeah. What was second to that?
So second to that, we basically had it for the permanent closures. Basically, that was the highest.
Yeah, that was it.
Second to that would be just a marginal report in Stanford district of 0.2%.
Yeah. Okay. Now, looking further into the reasons behind whether it was change, how COVID impacted business, the business operations, you looked at things like decrease in demand for products and services. Let's talk about those.
Yeah, so the business establishments were asked about the impact level that they have felt during the COVID-19, and about 61% indicated that they were highly impacted by the effects of COVID-19 regarding the demand that they received for their products and services, right? Similarly, when they reported the impact that COVID-19 had on the revenues, about 64% indicated that they had a high impact on the revenues and their income that they generated. Obviously, those two are very correlated. Another thing that was very interesting to see from the effects that we were asking was the difficulty to obtain the items from their suppliers for the production process.
Yeah.
About 38% indicated that they were highly impacted by the effects of COVID-19, the restrictions of
Yes.
going freely to the border and crossing the border to get their necessary materials was something that actually affected them. Yeah.
And it says, well, easier to obtain needed items for your supplies, 17.6%. That's interesting.
Yeah, so some of them had it felt that it was easier for them.
Wow.
So the predominant effect was the inability to have staff on site? Which one was it? No.
No. So all of them are independent, right?
Okay.
So each of the effects are independent, and so we analyze the effects independently from
Okay.
each other, right?
Yeah.
And of course, Wendy and Tanisha, you guys can jump in anytime now. Let's continue to understand. And there's one here that says length of time establishment would be able to continue operating. Now, less than 1 week was actually 1.1%.
Yes. So when we asked the establishments as of November 2020, remember that in November we still had restrictions, right? We were still working under some restrictions.
Okay.
If the restrictions were to continue, that was the question that was being asked.
Okay.
For how long would your business establishment be able to continue its operations?
Okay.
So yes, some of the respondents actually responded that they could only survive about 1 week, right? With the restrictions.
With all the restrictions.
Yeah.
But interestingly,
most of the establishment responded that they were able to survive more time.
and that's interesting because it's 38.3%, and this is because they don't know if the restrictions had to go on for longer.
Exactly, that's correct.
Okay. Then there's a 27% that says, well, we just don't know.
Exactly, that's correct.
So let's.
Another thing that we actually asked was the impact on the revenue level, right? The change in the revenue level. Basically, across all industries, almost everybody reported a loss in the revenue when compared to March of 2020. The ones that stood out was the accommodation and food services industry, which reported the highest loss in revenue level compared to March of 2020. And following that was the transportation and storage industries, which both of them are correlated, right?
Yeah.
So those were two ones that actually indicated the most that they had the most loss. Like almost all the establishments in those industries reported that they had a loss.
So let's talk about the cost-saving measures that were implemented, because this is where, I think a lot of people we've been talking about people who lost their jobs, people who are earning less. Tell us what the data shows.
Yes, so before we go to that, I think we would want to look at the adoptions that were implemented by the establishments, right? Some of the establishments, about 18%, indicated that they were able to change the way they produce their products or their services. And about 25% indicated that they had new ways to interact with their customers or to sell to them. So those were some of the key important things that the businesses did to adapt to the situation of the COVID-19. Now, when we look at the actual implementations of cost-saving measures,
One thing
right?
before that, though, because I do think it's worth noting, where there had been a lot of conversations about working from home, based on your data, based on this survey, there were actually only 1.9% of businesses that transitioned to work from home.
Wow.
Yeah, so that is, remember that is as of November 2020.
As of November.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was
Yeah.
really,
So
that was interesting.
So
to
that's one of the reasons probably.
Yeah.
Now the effects that the business establishments did to implement cost-saving measures, well, most of them, well, about 19.8%, sorry, reduced the staff hours or the shifts,
Yeah.
and 17.7% actually laid off staff.
Yeah.
Just some 15% introduced temporary cost-saving measers.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's look at this in perspective, because I think that this is where, you know, when you talk about the number one way that people started to save money was by laying off staff, 17.7%. And the reducing staff hours or shifts is also cutting down on number of hours that people work.
Yeah.
Which also results into the same thing as changing wages, right?
Well, if you look at it like that, yes, but it depends, right? So it depends on the perception of the person who is working.
Okay.
Yeah. So some people, so we had 17.7% of the businesses who participated saying they laid off staff to cut down on cost. Almost 20% cut down their hours, workers' hours. And then following that, they introduced temporary cost-saving measures, and reducing staff wages was at 7%. Freezing staff wages was at 1.3.
3%.
Yeah.
But if you look at it, most, well, 27.6% reported that they didn't implement anything.
Any changes?
That they continue to operate as normal.
Okay. Then there's also a 0.4% increased salaries, wages, or other compensation. Interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah. Do you know what type of businesses those were?
I don't have the information right away, but I definitely would have.
Yeah.
We can definitely have that.
That's
information.
definitely a standout
Yeah.
feature.
But more so, 0.6% hired more staff.
Yes, that's correct. We noted, that one I do remember, we noted that the administrative and support services industry, actually, when we compared the level of employment between November and March, they had a significant increase. And we believe that is due to the BPOs.
Yeah. Yeah, that does make sense. So Hector, how do we put this into perspective? The data that's presented here. One of the clear things is that it's a sample. Two, that it was as of November of last year.
Yeah, so the survey actually gives us an understanding of the socioeconomic impacts that the COVID-19 actually had on the business establishments, right? And yes, the business establishments have been suffering all throughout 2020. So the survey actually gives us the information to understand some of the things that have caused the suffering businesses to experience, and also some of the adaptations that were done by the business establishments to cope with the situation.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think those are the key factors that were observed from the survey.
Okay. And with respect to how we're doing, where do we fall within the region with how we were doing between that particular time, March 2020 to November 2020?
We would have to do that comparison. We actually haven't done that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. right. So that is the snapshot of what, as of November, some businesses, how COVID-19 impacted them.
That's great.
So let's move on to the labor force survey. One of the things that we are looking forward to, and I know you're about to start the process of collecting this data again. And I'd love to get Wendy or Tanisha into the conversation at this point to talk about what people can expect.
Hi, yes, good morning. Thank you for having us. We are here to share that we are going into the first round of the year of the labor force survey.
Yeah.
And for the survey, we are collecting information to be able to estimate a very key labor force statistics, such as the unemployment rate, the labor force participation rate, and the size and the structure of the labor force. In addition to this, we want to continue to measure the impacts of COVID-19 on the labor market. And in this round, we are also looking to estimate the levels of food insecurity in the country. And then we also have two modules that we included at the request of the Central Bank of Belize, which is the financial inclusion module. And that asks a series of questions that will guide them on their roadmap to total financial inclusion of the Belizean population. In addition to that, we also have a few questions about e-governance to assist the e-governance task force in their roadmap to providing e-governance services.
So that's interesting. These are going to be some new information that we'll be able to dissect when you have completed the survey. Now, how are you planning to collect the data?
We are going to be collecting the data on 3,000 households countrywide, and we have two modes of data collection actually. We want to continue to reduce the amount of face-to-face interviewing on the sample. And so we have contact information for 70% of our sample, and we obtained these numbers when we went out to do a listing exercise. We are still out in the field wrapping up that listing exercise so that that frame can serve us for the rest of the year, so that we can continue collecting data on the telephone using that frame. So we have information for 70% of the sample that they provided to us, and we will be calling them first. And then in households that don't have access to telephone, we will be heading out into the field to do the face-to-face interviewing, of course, following the social distancing protocol. And because we still see the importance of collecting that data.
Okay.
And when is this survey expected to get started?
Okay. The survey has started this past Sunday, and it will extend from the 4th of April to the 1st of May. So we will be collecting data for that 1 month period. And then you can expect to see the results during our press conference and the press release on June 30th.
Clearly, you mentioned started on Sunday, April 4th. So this is 7 days a week.
Yes, our data collectors collect information for 6 days during the week. They have 1 day off, and it's usually during the week. And the reason that they do this is because during the weekends, that's when most people would be available to answer the phone calls. They would have time, or in the evenings, that's when they're home. That's when they're free to answer us.
So help me understand, how do you ask questions about food insecurity? What type of tools are you using to measure that?
Okay, for the food insecurity, we actually incorporated a framework that is used by the Food and Agriculture Organization. So it there are 8 core questions that are used worldwide, and it's a reliable and acceptable way of measuring food insecurity. So we present 8 core questions, and then the household would respond to us detailing if they are experiencing this food insecurity due to a lack of resources, due to a lack of food. And then we would ask them how often in the past 12 months have they been experiencing this specific food insecurity, and how often they have been during the past 4 weeks. And then we follow up with a question to see if this was due to COVID-19. And then we also will be analyzing these 8 core questions and supplementing questions with the support of the Food and Agriculture Organization and the CARICOM.
Okay.
They are assisting us with providing a consultant to analyze these 8 questions and to get, we will have the information at the national level and at the district level.
Have we polled on food insecurity before, or this would be the first?
We had the 8 core questions in the 2010 census. What's different with this round of the LFS is that we want to measure how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the food insecurity levels in Belize. So that's the difference that we have. That's a new feature that we have in this round of the labor force survey.
And that's critical, because if your last measure was 2010, there would have been a baseline pre-COVID and then clearly impacts after COVID as well.
Yeah.
Yes. And this is actually, the benchmark that we want to provide. And we are one of the first in the region, in the Caribbean region, to be implementing these 8 core questions in the context of COVID-19. And, based on our findings and our experiences with implementing this framework provided by the FAO, all other Caribbean countries will be using the lessons that we learned here in Belize, looking at our methodology, and they will be, implementing that in the rest of the Caribbean as well.
Okay.
And Wendy? Wendy's still with us?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay. Wendy, as a statistician too, what is it like carrying out this work and the response from the public?
So we're very glad that we have transitioned over with telephone interviews now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we have had very good cooperation from the public. But others have not already gotten accustomed to telephone interviewing.
Okay.
So we're trying to get word out that we are still the same institute. We're trying to publicize that it is still the same trained interviewers that are representing the SIB. But just due to the pandemic, we're conducting telephone interviews now wherever it is possible.
We've established already that it's in the evening time for the most part that these questions are being asked. But what is the timeline for the 8 core questions? Like, how long do you take to do 8 core questions?
Okay, so it seems that we're losing that
Audio
connection there for a moment. Let me just squeeze in some additional issues, some other points before we lose time. The recent consumer price index, I think it tells us what we all already knew, which is that prices are up, food prices especially.
Yes.
Who wants to take on that one?
We will pass that on to the economic statistician.
Yeah. Hefte, are you still there?
Yes, sorry, right now.
Yeah, I can tell you have a junior statistician there that wants to join in the conversation. You can put him to sit with you,
The results of the Consumer Price Index for February 2021 indicated that there is an increase of approximately 1.3%.
Okay.
And compared to February 2020 in the prices.
Yeah.
Mainly what affected the prices was food and non-alcoholic beverages, which actually increased by 5.6%. Following that was the effects of personal care, social protection, and miscellaneous goods and services, which increased by 1.8%. Recreation, sports, and culture actually also impacted the prices, increasing by 1.4%. And the housing, water, and electricity, gas, and other fuels also increased by 0.8%. What I can point out is that in the food, non-alcoholic, and beverages, the prices in fruits and vegetables are the ones that are triggering the upward trend. And in the housing, water, and electricity, gas, and other fuels, this was actually triggered by the increase in the butane prices and a slight increase in home rental costs, right? And in the personal care, social protection, and miscellaneous goods and services, it was actually personal hygiene products that the prices increased for. So those were the ones that actually were affecting the prices. Yes, there have been some categories that actually decreased. For example, like the transportation category, it decreased by 0.3% compared to February of last year. As the fuel prices were much higher at that point in February, but that doesn't mean that fuel is not going up, right? When we compare the fuel price, against the previous month, we see an upward trend.
Wow.
So we expect that sometime in the future, the transportation index will also have an inflation.
And the highest inflation was in San Pedro, based on municipalities.
Wow.
Yes, so the highest inflation registered is in San Pedro town. But we just highlight that separately because we're just making an inference for the inflations of for the CPI index for San Pedro, Independence, and Benqueviejo del Carmen for 2020, as we only introduced them in October of 2020.
Okay.
Sure, go ahead.
So the actual comparison that we can actually make is with the other municipalities, and Punta Gorda town was the one that had the highest inflation rate with about 2.4%.
Wow, the numbers are they're very staggering numbers indeed. But information very vital. Tell us about imports and exports within that particular time.
Okay, so the imports decreased by 7.1% for in the month of February, and exports actually went up by 58.2% in the month of February. What we have been seeing in the importation of merchandise goods is that specific categories have been declining. For instance, the machinery and transportation equipment and goods being sent to the commercial free zones, those have been decreasing. Sorry.
It's all right. Yeah. We can hear you clearly.
Yes. The other thing that we have identified, for instance, in the commercial free zone, is that there was a drop of about 30% in the imports of goods, mainly because the activity in the commercial free zones is limited, I guess. So they have been importing less handbags and fans and clothing during the month of February.
Oh.
But some categories actually increased. For instance, in food and live animals, that reported an increase in the importation of goods and services. Of goods, sorry, that increased about 2.1, rose from 17.5 to $21.1 million when we do the comparison. And that was mainly because of more wheat being imported to the country. When we look at the actual exportation of goods, we see that February actually had a higher level of export compared to February of last year.
Yeah.
And this was mainly due to the sugar exports.
Yeah.
As in last year, we only exported about $0.2 million worth of sugar. And this year we exported $14 million worth of sugar. This is mostly due to timing of the logistics of the companies. So that was the only one of the major categories, right, that affected I guess the main category that actually affected the exports.
Definitely skewed it because we look at other major industries like citrus and banana and even marine taking a decline there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. These are really interesting numbers. So, we're out of time at this time, but I appreciate you breaking down the data to help us understand several things, where we are with the consumer price index, imports and exports, and most importantly, what you found out in your survey of how COVID-19 impacted businesses. Ladies, we appreciate you giving us the information about the ongoing labor force survey that's taking place at this time. So you may get a phone call, you may be asked to participate. Of course, we know you always tell us that this is confidential information and really critical to help us understand what is happening in the country. Thank you all for joining us, and of course, continue to stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. So we're about to take a commercial break. When we come back, we'll be chit-chatting to reps of Galen University on the launch of 2 new classes. We'll tell you what those are when we come back. Stay with us.
This COVID update was brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price, but stay for the service.